Hello everybody and welcome to the Head First Project, where it is all about attacking life head first. Thank you for listening. My name is Nate Hoffman. I am your host. Today is Saturday Stew. This is where we talk about a fitness topic in depth and stew over the science behind it to better understand how and why things happen, to get a better insight into our bodies and training. Today's topic is the basic principles of skeletal muscle. Today's information behind the project comes from Elaine Marieb and Katja Hohen's book, Human Anatomy and Physiology. This is the 10th edition of the textbook. It is a gigantic 1,000-page textbook. I'm sure most of you that went through PAFM with me have this book already. If you don't and you want to learn about anatomy, definitely look into this series of textbook. It is an excellent textbook. It has everything you could ever want to know about anatomy in here and is definitely worth it. Before we get started, I want to talk about some general information on all the muscles in the body. There's 3 types of muscles in your body. There are smooth muscles. These make up your organs like your stomach, your liver, your kidneys, and everything like that. These are muscles that you don't have conscious control over. They just operate on their own. They're on autopilot, and they function routinely by themselves. There are cardiac muscles. These are only found in the heart itself. These are also non-voluntary, but their structure is a little bit different than smooth muscles. Also, we have skeletal muscles, which is going to be the main focus of discussion today. These are large muscles that cover your body, and they're easily seen under your skin. They're used for mobility, general function, and structural purposes. They're voluntary for the most part. You have a lot of conscious control over them. Some are going to be a lot easier to control than others. If you've ever done things like training your abs, I know for me specifically, I have a lot more control over my right-hand side. I can flex that a lot harder than the left-hand side. It's the same with different parts of your body. You might notice muscles in your face, things like that. You can control a lot stronger than others. So the big difference between skeletal muscles and smooth muscles are the striations and the fibers. You can see in a muscle or a piece of meat, you see the lines that run through it. These are the striations that we're talking about. They're like the straight lines of the muscle fibers that are visible whenever you look at them real close. And then also in people that have incredibly low body fat percentage, like bodybuilders and high-level athletes and that sort of stuff, you can sometimes see the striations in their muscles through their skin whenever they flex their muscles. The feathery sort of look, that's what the striations are. Beginning to look into skeletal muscles. The skeletal muscles have 4 main functions in your body. They're responsible for allowing you to move, positioning your body, stabilizing your joints so they don't explode, and generating heat. Whenever you shiver, your muscles contract and shake you all around, because whenever the chemical reactions in your muscles make those muscles flex and contract, it is an exothermic reaction that releases heat. So whenever your body needs to generate heat to keep warm, it burns up energy in your muscles and produces heat by shivering. Whenever you look at the structure of a muscle, it is the muscle itself, and it is attached to your body by a tendon. These tendons run from the muscle to the bones, and these tendons are the anchors that keep everything in place. Similar to that, in your bones, connecting to other bones, you have ligaments. These are a little bit different than tendons, but that's a whole different topic that I might talk about eventually. The important thing is to know that your muscles begin in one place. That is going to be your origin point. They run across whatever bone or area that they are responsible for controlling, and they attach in a different point via a tendon to their insertion point. Whenever you break down a skeletal muscle and look at a picture of it to see all the parts of it, now to see more of this, I highly suggest Googling a picture of a muscle or looking in a textbook, something like that, because looking at a good diagram of this is going to make this make so much more sense. The skeletal muscle in the body is made up of a lot of layers. So whenever you look at a muscle, it normally just looks like one gigantic clump of tissue. That gigantic clump is the muscle itself. Outside of that muscle, you have a casing on it. That is the epimecium. That is a tissue that forms the large outside container that wraps around the entirety of the skeletal muscle and holds it all together. Inside of that epimecium, you have fascicles. The fascicles are bundles of fibers in a muscle that are sort of compartmentalized pieces of that muscle. They're oblong shaped. They're sort of like an oval, kind of off oval shape. It just depends throughout the muscle. It varies a little bit. Wrapping these fascicles up is the paramecium. This is another membrane inside that contains these fascicles together into those little oblong-shaped bundles. Inside of these fascicle compartments, you have the endomecium. This is another membrane that covers individual muscle fibers. These are a little bit more round in shape, The muscle fiber bundles are surrounded by the endomysium. This is like the end level, you can tell by the name, of the membranes that hold these bundles together. And then you have the muscle fibers. The muscle fibers are the portion of the muscle that actually contracts on a cellular level to get the work done. Inside these muscle fibers, there are even smaller pieces, the myofibrils. That's where all the chemical reactions happen. That is a whole other podcast topic because it is incredibly complicated how all of this works. And the myofibrils are really tiny. They're like little strings that make up the big fibers in the muscle. So for this purpose of this podcast, the muscle fiber is the lowest portion of the muscle that we're going to divide it into. Like I said, if you look up a picture of a muscle that is like exploded or dissected out into a diagram, it's a lot easier to see it in a drawn diagram rather than something like a cadaver diagram that uses actual muscle tissue. You can see an exploded view of a muscle, and from what I told you about the fascicles and the different membranes and the muscle fibers and everything, it telescopes the muscle out so you can see each individual piece and how they layer together. If you look up a picture of this and look at that while I explain it, it will make so much more sense. So look up a picture of that, go back and listen to all the parts, and you will understand a lot better if you don't already know what I'm talking about. One way that I've thought about to explain this that puts it into a little bit of simpler terms for people that may not have had anatomy classes or are that familiar with this sort of thing, muscles are sort of like pomegranates. If you've ever eaten a pomegranate and you can look up a picture of a pomegranate or look at one in front of you, it is a really good way to visualize and understand how the muscles in the human body are structured. The outside red skin of the pomegranate is like the epimecium. It holds the whole fruit together. Inside, you have the white skin and the flesh of the fruit that compartmentalizes it into the fascicles. That white part would be the paramecium that surrounds the fascicles and holds it into its little oblong bundles. Now, these fascicles are going to be the bundles of the fruit particles that you see in there, the red pieces that are all clumped together. Those weird shapes are the fascicles, and they're surrounded by that membrane. Inside of the fascicles, you have the other membrane that is surrounding the fruit itself, the almost clearish membrane on the fruit. That is the endomysium. The endomysium is holding inside that end unit. Inside of that flesh of the fruit, you have the seed. That seed is like the muscle fiber. That's what gets the work done. If you can look at a diagram of a muscle that's exploded and pulled apart like that, and you can look at a pomegranate, just in the way I described it, you can see the similarities of that, and it's a lot easier way to understand how it's all broken down. And the parts are almost nearly identical. So once you've understood how muscles are structured and built and how the pieces of them fit together, we need to talk about how they're oriented. In the human body, there's between 600 and 800 muscles. It depends on who you ask and what day of the week it is, essentially. But it is widely accepted that there are at least 600 muscles in the human body. They're shaped and placed all kinds of different ways across the human body. It just depends on what their function is, their purpose, what sort of actions they complete. It really depends on what the end goal of that muscle's use is. There's a lot of common structures of skeletal muscles. You have circular muscles. These are round, shaped like a circle. Who would have guessed it? These are found in places like your lips and around your eyes. Whenever they contract, they're sort of weird from what you would normally think of as a muscle. They go from a large O to a smaller one. Whenever you open your mouth or say words with an O or something like that in it, it tightens up and turns into a smaller O. When you squint your eyes, these muscles contract and it makes a smaller circle. Next, we have convergent muscles. Convergent muscles are muscles that the fibers start in a bunch of different places and then they all converge at one point. This is commonly seen in your chest and your lats. In your chest, your pectoral muscle, it starts on your sternum. So your sternum is the center of your rib cage that runs from the bottom of your throat to the top of your stomach. And your pectoral muscle starts essentially up by your collarbone and fans down around towards your stomach. So whenever these fibers all start at these different places, they converge over in your shoulder. It's almost like a big leaf that comes together from the center of your chest to one sharp point at the end on the outside where it inserts into your arm. Next, we have parallel muscles. These are muscles in which the fibers run parallel with the length of the muscle from the origin to the insertion. These are a lot of the muscles in your arm, including your bicep and some of the forearm muscles, as well as your abdominals. Lastly, we have pennate muscles. Pennate muscles are, in my opinion, the most complicated type of muscle. These originate from multiple different locations and insert on the same tendon, but in different places on that tendon. You see this most commonly in your deltoid. Your deltoid is your shoulder muscle. You have 3 parts of your shoulder muscle. You have the anterior portion in the front delt, you have the lateral portion in your side delt, and your posterior portion in your rear delt. These all come from different places up in your shoulder and then insert in the same place on your arm. So when a muscle contracts, it happens at that cellular level at the myofibril. I'm going to talk about this a lot more in depth in another podcast, but for today's purpose, I'm going to go over it briefly just so everyone understands how this happens. So when your muscles contract, it happens at that myofibril, and then the myofibril has cellular interactions that cause the muscle itself to contract. Whenever a muscle contracts at that cellular level, it uses ATP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It's a common molecule in your body that's used for fueling actions. For a muscle to contract, its insertion point needs to move closer to its origin point. Whatever joint that muscle crosses is going to be the joint that it performs action on. For example, your bicep and your upper arm on your humerus. It originates up in your shoulder, goes over your humerus bone, and inserts into your forearm on your radius. When you flex your bicep, your forearm moves closer to your shoulder. This is how muscles perform work. It is stretched over a joint. So if that muscle was not covering that joint and didn't cross it, whenever the muscle shrunk and got smaller, it would not be pulling those things closer together so your joints wouldn't move. And with the contraction of a muscle and application to training, there are a couple different ways that you can look at muscle contractions and using them in training. You have your concentric phase, which is the work phase of that. Once again, going back to your bicep, whenever you are flexing your forearm up to your shoulder, for example, if you're performing a curl, like a dumbbell curl or a barbell curl, something like that, and you're squeezing that muscle, you are in the concentric phase of the movement. You're squeezing it and contracting it together. After that, you have the eccentric phase. The eccentric phase is when you're returning the muscle to its original length. This would be whenever you have already curled the bar and you're lowering it back down to where your arms are straight. Now, this is the same for every muscle. There are the concentric and eccentric phases for every action of every muscle. You can look at it the same way for your quads in a squat. Whenever you go down towards the floor from a standing position and you're lowering yourself, that is the eccentric phase of the movement for your quads. Your quads are resisting the weight of your body as you go closer to the floor. On your way up, you are squeezing your quads to return your legs to a straight position so you're standing up vertical. That is the concentric phase as you are contracting the muscle. Besides the concentric and eccentric phases, you also have a isometric phase of a muscle contraction. This is when you are holding something at a static point. Whenever you do a wall sit, for example, whenever you have your knees at a 90-degree angle and you prop yourself up against the wall and you're squeezing your legs just trying to stay there, that is an isometric contraction. You're not actively moving, but you are still contracting your muscles to hold what you are doing. Throughout the phase of a contraction, there is something known as the muscle length force curve theory. This looks at the efficiency of your muscle in relation to how much it is stretched or contracted. There's a curve diagram that you can see with this that goes into it. If you look up a diagram of this, you can see the curve on a graph. And essentially what happens is when your muscle is stretched out the entire way, if you extend your arm the whole way to stretch out your bicep, at that point, it is going to be super inefficient. Your bicep is overstretched and it's not going to be very efficient in performing work. Partway through the contraction, when your elbow is, say, at about 90 degrees, it's partially contracted and it is going to be incredibly strong at this point. It is very, very, very efficient. As you flex a little bit further and you get close to that maximally contracted phase of the movement, you're going to dip off in efficiency. This is why you see sticking points in lifts. This happens a lot in the bench press. Unrack the bar and they get it over their chest. They start to lower it down. They touch their chest and they get up maybe 2/3 of the way through the press and they just stop. At this point, that is where you have passed through your most efficient phase of the contraction with that muscle and you are now at a mechanical disadvantage. You're not pushing that weight with as much ease as you were when your muscle is at a different portion of its stretchability. The same thing can happen for squat, overhead press, bicep curls, pretty much anything you can think of. Each muscle has that force curve that, depending on how much it is elongated, is going to be related to how strong it is. This is also why in training a lot of people use these points. Now you can develop these points to get a little bit more efficient and better at dealing with them. This is why you see people do things like pause deadlifts. You pick up the bar and then you stop partway up your shin or partway up your thigh. You see people doing things like rack pulls. This works on different phases of the movement where your muscles are at different amounts of a stretch. People use blocks when they're benching, putting blocks on your chest. This is also going to work on your sticking points, stopping your muscles from going to a fully elongated position, or stopping them short to where they have tension on them the whole time and they have to work through those parts of the curve that are less efficient to develop the strength in those deficits. Yes, this is a lot of information, and I'm not even going in depth that far. It is a lot to understand, and I just wanted to go over the basics for those of you that might not have had anatomy classes or be that familiar with skeletal muscles and how things work and the way we refer to them, the way they operate, and how to use them. I'm going to be going a lot more in depth on topics as the future episodes come out. I just wanted to give this nice overview to start. For those of you that are maybe new to training or wanting to learn more about training, one way that I think is very, very efficient to understanding your body more, to target things in training or get a better mind-muscle connection, to contract those muscles, like I was saying. Some people might not be as efficient if you're right-handed or left-handed using that other side. If you look up anatomical diagrams of the human body, you can see where all of your muscles are and what joints they cross. If you want to work on part of your shoulder, rhomboids, you can see that a lot of people, whenever they do rows, they don't squeeze their shoulder blades back and flex those rhomboids and get a good contraction out of them. But if you look at an anatomical diagram of a human body and you see where the muscles like your rhomboid originate and insert, you have a lot better understanding of what joint you need to move to get the best contraction out of that muscle. So if you can visualize where you need to move and how you need to move to target the muscles you want to target, it will work a lot better in your training. To summarize all of this, you have a shit ton of muscles in your body. There are over 600 of them. If you ask some people, they'll tell you there's like 800. People change their minds a lot. Different books say different things, but it's at least 600. There's a lot. Way too many to learn the function, name, placement of every single one of them. Understanding how the big ones operate and the ones that you want to target will really help your training and the way you plan things out and get you a better understanding of how to use them when you are training them. They do a lot of different things, from movement, holding your bones in place, holding your body in place, regulating temperature, and keeping your knees from leaving your skin at the bottom of a squat by holding your joints together. There's a lot of different parts to a muscle that I'm going to go more in depth about and talk about when I go over the function at the cellular level as to how the myofibrils actually contract within a muscle. There's a lot of different shapes and orientations of muscles depending on the purpose they serve. Understanding the shapes of them and the purpose of them will also help you with that mind-muscle connection and getting a better contraction out of them when you're training them. Be mindful of the different types of contractions that a muscle can go through and how to use them in your training for things like breaking sticking points. And look into the force curve for different muscles so you can see why you're sticking in certain points of your training. Maybe it's not just you. Maybe it's not just your technique. Maybe you have a physical, mechanical disadvantage at that portion of the lift, and that's just physics. That's just how it works. Absolutely, you can work on it and get better, but sometimes physics is just against you. Thank you guys so much for listening to the episode. Please share this with anyone that you think might be interested in this or want to gain some more knowledge about their training or in their body so they get a better understanding of how to do things efficiently. Please don't be afraid to contact me, give me your feedback, tell me what you liked, what you didn't like, what you want to hear, future suggestions, anything like that. You can find my personal account on Instagram at TheOnlyHoff, or you can find the official Headfirst Project page on Instagram at Headfirst Project. You can email me at headfirstproject@gmail.com. Follow me on YouTube and SoundCloud as well. Podcasts will soon be released to Spotify. Hopefully by the time this episode goes up on Saturday, that will already be appearing on Spotify. Look out for the next episode of Monday Massacre coming this week. We're going to focus on avoiding new social norms of awkwardness and non-communication. We need to get over this, and I'm going to talk about how. And remember, always attack life head first.